Welcome, everybody. It's okay. I'm Eric Patashnik, Director of the Public Policy Program here at the Watson Institute, and it's a pleasure to welcome you today to what I'm sure is going to be a really stimulating conversation on politics in the age of Trump, the 2018 midterms and beyond. One of the important things about American politics is an election is always around the corner, and here we are again. And that's one of the things that keeps our political process so vibrant and interesting. And we have two phenomenal speakers to shed light not only on the midterm, but a broader conversation about our two-party system and the evolution of the American state and some of the challenges we face. So let me introduce them. First of all, Jenny Backus, who is the founder, owner, president, everything of the Backus consulting firm, which specializes in strategy development, campaign and project management, and intergovernmental consulting for corporations, media outlets, trade associations, nonprofit organizations, academic institutions, and political campaigns and committees. Before starting the firm in 2016, she served for 3 years as a senior policy advisor and head of strategic partnership and engagement for Google. She has extensive experience in politics and public policy. Jenny served in the first 2 years of the Obama administration as the acting assistant secretary for public affairs and the principal deputy assistant secretary for strategy and planning at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Prior to that, she held important communications and press secretary positions with the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the Democratic National Committee, and U.S. Senator Harry Reid. In addition to running her own consulting business, she also serves on a number of boards, including chair of the National Network to End Domestic Violence, the World Learning Board, and the D.C. Public Library Foundation Board. And she is an alum of Brown, so welcome back
Class
home.
of 90, yay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. And our second speaker is Brian Jones, who's currently a partner at the Virginia-based BlackRock Group, where he creates and manages public affairs and public relations campaigns for a diverse set of clients, ranging from Google and Uber to the Human Rights Campaign, and even the Friends of the National Zoo. That was my favorite of the clients you listed.
It's an interesting one.
Yeah. Over the past 2 decades, Brian has helped lead communications and advocacy efforts for a variety of industries. In the nonprofit realm, he's worked in support of marriage equality, early childhood education, eradicating child sex trafficking, and keeping kids safe online. He's also been very active in the world of electoral politics. He served in senior roles for the presidential campaigns of George W. Bush, John McCain, Mitt Romney, Chris Christie, as well as serving as communications director for the Republican National Committee, and has been named one of the top free agent GOP operatives by the Washington Post. He currently serves on a number of boards as well, including the National Network to End Domestic Violence. He earned his master's degree from the University of Washington in Seattle and his BA from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. So welcome both of you. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
They will begin with a brief presentation, and then we'll have some conversations and plenty of time for Q&A.
Great. Well, first of all, I just want to thank Eric and Carrie Nordland and Christy and everybody from the Watson Institute who has warmly welcomed us to Brown today, and also just for the great work that you guys are doing in Washington, D.C. I don't know if, as many of you know, that the Watson Institute is actually starting to be much more prolific and out there in D.C. and is producing staffers everywhere. Everywhere I go in Washington, I meet someone from Brown. So it's really fun. Like, I meet people that have run for Congress and been elected. The last time I was in this room, I was sitting next to Tom Perez when he was an Obama appointee, and now he's running the party. My former RA, Tom Perelli, is coming back this week, I think, with Dennis McDonough. So that Brown has a lot of people out there, and I'm very proud to be here, and I'm very grateful for the invitation. And I just want to say before we start, thank you to my very good friend Brian Jones. It's never fun to go on a college campus this day as a Republican, but it's important. And what's one of the things that Brian and I want to talk about? I also want to ask you that Brian is not personally responsible for everything that the Republicans have done. So I hope you give him, he's got a lot of his own opinions, some of which I agree with. And Brian and I have actually had, and Eric will talk about this before we start, we've had the opportunity to go up against each other in political battle. And I think he won early battles. I won some of the later ones. But we also used to work together at Google. He was one of my best consultants. And I would hire him in a minute. I'm glad he's my friend, but I also think he's one of the top in the business, and we're really lucky to have him. So thank you for coming, Brian.
Thank you for having me.
All right, well, we're going to go through some slides here. You kind of get wedded to PowerPoint slides when you work in Washington, but we promise it'll be fast. We want to set up the conversation a little bit today with some thoughts that we've had, and then take your questions, because I think this is the great thing about American politics is a dialogue and lots of different opinions. So, Brian, you want to start with the first? You have to do the clicker, because
I'll do the clicker here.
Technically.
Okay, let's see here. So politics in the age of Trump. And I think that one of the things that we wanted to talk a little bit about today is how did we get to where we are? I think there's a lot of people both on the Republican side, Democrat side, and in between kind of trying to figure out how exactly did we arrive at this place. So we're going to try to break down some things that we believe have kind of led to the American political system being where it is now from a number of different fronts. And the first thing that you'll see here, we have this slide that illustrates distrust in government. And you can really take a look at this, and this is very instructive, I think, in terms of seeing, you know, where things were going back, obviously, in the Eisenhower-Kennedy administrations. Really big problems developing in Vietnam, and if anyone's watching the Ken Burns series right now, you really see that kind of illustrated. And then really this continual erosion, a little bit of a pop-up, you know, towards the end of Clinton, beginning of George Walker Bush, but a lot of distrust in government and people not viewing government as a place for solutions, but being part of the problem. If there's anything else you want to mention on that one.
I was just going to say, on that trend line, I think you do see moments when certain sort of inspirational presidents are elected, the confidence, or if there's national disasters. But I think overall, there has been a developing narrative that government doesn't work for people. And I think that that's some of the language that you heard if you listen to Trump in it. And this, I think it's important to see that distrust is not just a product of Trump, though, but it's been building for a long time. So if you need to understand that in order to think about how to solve for that. So this one is increased political polarization. And actually, Brian and I are kind of, in some senses, an odd couple these days. If you look at the stats that are out there, people inside the political parties, both out in the quote-unquote real world and in Washington, are increasingly only talking to people that agree with them. And we'll talk a little bit more about the media out. We think there's some reasons for that because of what's happened to communications and media. But it's become very disturbing that more and more people of each party don't talk to people of the other party. And that's kind of a little bit why we're doing this roadshow together, because there are people that actually do work together. It's a little bit less in the political realm and more in the problem-solving realm, whether it's corporations or nonprofits, people that come to Washington and want to be able to talk to both sides of the aisle. That's where friendships like ours have really developed. I mean, we have a lot of things in common, and we'll talk more about that with Eric, but I think the increased political polarization in the country, you know, and part of it is red state, blue state. I mean, a lot of defining people by what party they vote for. That's dangerous, and I think that's kind of another reason that's led to this moment. Anything else you want on that one?
No, just the chart on the far left. I mean, the opinions of people from the opposite party, the very unfavorables, I think, are troubling, because you're talking about a generic individual. You're not talking about people specifically. So just seeing that this rise in unfavorability in terms of how people view the opposite party is, I think, problematic. Distrust in the media. This is something else that's kind of led again to where we are now with President Trump. This belief that the media is not fair, not reporting objectively, and again, you know, going back just from the late '90s to where we are now, and the numbers continue to go down. And certainly, with the narrative that we see now in terms of fake news, it's probably only going to get worse. So again, I think another contributing factor to what we saw, the kind of alchemist's mix which occurred that allowed, I think, the current president to do what he's been able to do.
And again, some of that goes back. I remember working on the first it was Bush Cheney, and Dick Cheney successfully sort of waging war on the New York Times with some expletives that I won't reply here. But it's been a tradition, both parties, but more, I think the Republicans have done a good job of framing it. I don't mean to blame you. It's not all your fault. But I think people, there's also been a rise on the progressive side of the corporate ownership of media, and people have a lot of problems thinking that some messages aren't coming out, or the lack of diverse voices inside media ownership groups, or actually on the air.
Changes in the media landscape. I think this is really important. I do think a lot of the segmentation that you wind up seeing now in the current political discourse can definitely be traced to a certain extent to the rise of social media. People are segmented in their little groups. They can communicate with individuals who are just like them, which just reinforce their own existing viewpoints. This is a little dated here on the left, but you can see basically people getting their news online. Overall, you see the decline in television, decline in print newspapers. You see online going up. And again, online means not just someone who's looking at news stories, but looking at things through their social media feed. And I do think that is you can't go back on that. But I do think you're in a world now where if you want one point of view, it's much easier to just consume that one point of view.
I think this actually has. I worked at Google, so I could see ad sales numbers and how that team grew political campaign year after political campaign year. And I didn't connect the dots and wake up and see sort of how influential it's been. And I think as Congress has been doing these hearings in the last couple of days with the big media companies and seeing the extent, and I'm not necessarily blaming the media companies here, I do think that most of us, it was a wake-up call with this election about how could this happen and how could information be put out there that wasn't accurate. I think this was a big wake-up call for us, but again, another thing that's been sort of happening for a while. And I also think the other part of this slide, it's not just the social media, but it's a concentration of ownership of inside these media groups. So I don't know how many of you know about Sinclair Broadcasting. It's an organization that's about, hopefully not, but probably will get a license to own a bunch of local television stations. But it's also happened in some of the media ownership of the newspapers. Again, not just picking on one side, but the sort of changing ownership, the failing revenues, the closing of newspapers. There are some signs of hope still, I think, although I'm a little worried with Sinclair, but a lot of people believe what they hear on their local radio and local TV inside their markets. They get their sources of news there. A lot of people from communities that maybe didn't speak English at first still trust their ethnic language newspaper, so Hispanic media, Chinese media, newer immigrants. Even though it's in English, they go back to sort of some of the groups that they have identified. So there's some hope for trying to get some kind of diversity into this, but I think Brian's totally right about you can shop around and find who you want. And this is just some more on the rise of social media. Anything you want to add on there?
No.
Okay.
I think we're going to jump right now to another factor. So part of the thing with Trump, too, I think, so you've got this environment, I think, where you've got distrust in government, you've got this changing landscape of media, you've got more fragmentation within the parties, and into it walks an individual who, on some level, has been uniquely positioned to capitalize on it. And one of the things about Trump, I think, that people have to remember, and I grew up in the greater New York area in New Jersey, is, Trump's someone who's been at this for a long time. He kind of came of age in the world of New York real estate, media, dealing with tabloid headlines. So today we deal with 140 characters. I mean, he's been dealing with this world for 30 years, right? Trying to get that quick hit on the New York Post or on the front page of the Daily News. And as Jenny pointed out in the conversation earlier, you look at The Apprentice, right? I mean, this is someone who has had hundreds of millions of dollars of free advertising. He also, for all of his issues he may have, he is quite adept in terms of knowing how to throw a media cycle and deal with the media. So he is very much a unique actor in that regard.
And I think he believes that any press is good press. I mean, he's fine with being attacked. In fact, it sort of brings him an energy. And again, going back to agree with Brian, this is another thing that when we were doing these slides, I was like, okay, I should have remembered that when I woke up a year and a day ago in complete shock. I actually didn't really go to sleep, but after the last election, this is a thing that I think the Democrats massively underestimated in the last presidential election. Just how mainstream and sort of just who Trump was talking to. When I was growing up in politics, it was always a dream to try to land an interview with your presidential candidate, and it wasn't always easy with guys like John Kerry on Entertainment Tonight. Because I looked at all the data, and that was what the persuadable women that I needed to move in those states were getting their news from Entertainment Tonight. And if you could get a presidential, so oftentimes that would be we'd have to throw some party in Hollywood and then get them to do an interview with Barbra Streisand, which maybe wasn't the right message either, but I like Barbra Streisand, so that was fine. But But I think that we have really struggled as a party, and most candidates on both sides have really struggled to find a way to connect in the mainstream media and sort of take off and become viral. And Trump has mastered it. I think the other thing that Brian made that's just worth repeating is the kind of sound bites that get you covered in the tabs are short, pithy, and usually picking on somebody else. And that is, I mean, Twitter was almost built for Donald Trump. And so that's why I think he's been able to sort of really, both as a candidate and as president, break a bunch of rules and sort of control the media landscape in a way that we haven't seen in a long time. The good news is the media is starting to fight back a little bit, but it is a factor when you're thinking, how do we get here?
Yep.
Okay. The divider, not the uniter. I hearken back to my days as a Brown English major when we were reading Nietzsche, and I wrote a very brilliant paper, I'm sure, on how to define the other. But that's actually a lesson that I have tried to remember in politics, and it's kind of an axiom in every campaign that I've worked on. The whole goal in a campaign is to define yourself and define your opponent before they can define you. And what I think Trump has done incredibly well, working, not well, that's, I don't want to use a word that, that signifies like goodness, but what he has done effectively, I think, is define a common enemy, or try to turn someone else into an enemy so that it's a bad guy versus good guy sort of simplistic fight. And a lot of what he does is defining other people as and part of it is his narcissism, I think, and part of it is just his tactics. And Bannon has helped him stoke that. He's not afraid to lie down with people that other politicians of every party never would have. And I think he's tried to, and he's definitely doing it on a racial front. I mean, it wasn't surprising to me to look into the Washington Post poll that just came out this Sunday and see that half of America thinks that Trump is biased against black people, and 55% of America thinks Trump is biased against women. I mean, that's just shocking numbers for a president in modern day. And it's because I think he has a, just like it's the same skills that brought him to master the tabloid media. Tabloid media always likes to have a bad guy too. And he has created some new people and picked fights that you think, who would pick a fight with the NFL? I mean, the NFL is the most, and he picks a fight with the NFL. Or who would go after kids that are in college, or little girls with cerebral palsy waiting to get deported? But no. Or who would go after Gold Star families and pick public fights and walk away with them? But that's all about sort of defining who he is and who he isn't. And I think, unfortunately, who he is not someone who's black, brown, or probably a woman.
Yeah,
sorry, Brian,
no,
no.
and I agree with everything you're saying. And the other thing too is, even within the Republican Party, I mean, he's picked fights against, you know, John McCain, Mitch McConnell,
Jeff
Flake, you know, so
Corker.
you know, it cuts across a lot of different fronts. We're going to take a little look at the midterms and 2020 as well, and I know we'll have some more conversations about that. But I think, you know, right now it's really hard to say what's going to happen. I mean, certainly the generic ballot right now does not look good for Republicans. It looks good for Democrats. Democrats are also doing a very good job on the recruiting front. If you're a Democrat, this is definitely the year to run. But right now, it's a little uncertain for our parties in terms of how things are going to wind up shaking out.
Yeah, and just to build on that, and you can go to the next slide if you want. That slide shows just how hard it is on the Senate side. So starting with the Senate map is almost impossible for Democrats. There's Democrats running in 23 states. 10 of those states, I think, I hope I'm getting these numbers right. I'm winging it backwards, reading it backwards. But 10 of those states are in Trump-controlled territory. And in fact, Roll Call this morning came out with their top 10 list of most vulnerable senators. And the only Republican on it is #1, Dean Heller, who single-handedly it was like watching a political meltdown. I don't think anyone could have handled the healthcare situation worse than Dean Heller. He was like John Kerry, but on steroids. He was before. I don't mean to be so mean to John Kerry, because I actually think he's been a great Secretary of State and he was a good boss. But he was before it, before he was against it, before he was for it, before he was against it. He's the most vulnerable Republican. Every other Democrat, every other person on that top 10 list is a Democrat. So we're running races in West Virginia. We're running races with Claire McCaskill in Missouri, Montana, Florida, which is sort of a toss-up state, So the Democrats have a lot to do, and I think it would take a tsunami-sized wave in order to flip it for us. We do have some interesting candidates running in places. Arizona is an interesting state on the presidential front. On the House side, things look much better. The retirements, they're sort of the 3 R's of looking at the midterms: recruitment, retirement, and resources. Resources, I think Democrats have outraised the Republicans in a couple of cycles on the NRCC, but on the other hand, you have got this Trump money machine. He's raising a ton of money on his side. He doesn't really love Congress right now, but he does love to win. I also think that there's some policy challenges for the Republicans with the tax bill, and we have nice meaty things as Democrats to unpack and use against them. Some of the votes that they've cast are not good. There's also the curse of I call it the curse of the presidential bambino in some senses. Presidents in their first midterm lose generally, other than George Bush, and that was right after 9/11, generally lose lots and lots of seats in their off-year elections. And when the president's approval rating is a net negative 22, which it currently is right now, I can understand why Nancy Pelosi has already sent me 3 emails today about how I need to invest in the DCCC, where I used to work. But turnout for Democrats is terrible in midterms generally. Now, again, I think we have a different kind of year, and we have some different kind of problems, and we have a different kind of president who's not afraid to endorse the Nazi Party and attack people for their racial heritage. But I do. It is challenging, and there's an interesting thing in the Washington Post. You read about the congressional ballot being, Fox News even says it's 15 points. But if you look at turnout models of likely voters, the race gets down to 48 to 46. So our voters are younger people, people of color, women, non-college educated women. All of those categories are folks that don't always vote in midterm elections, and it would take, and you need a really organized turnout operation, which unfortunately we don't really have right now on the Democratic side.
Move forward here. I think Jenny's already got into a number of these statistics. I think you coined this phrase, the M factor.
Yeah,
So
there's always like the October surprise, but there's also what I'm saying for the midterms is there is an M factor. So you have a madman in North Korea, you have Mueller, who's doing this investigation, and then you have John McCain, who symbolizes 2 things, and I'll let Brian, who worked for him, talk a little bit more. But John McCain, to me, shows what could be really bad for the Democrats politically, but really good for the country is if Republicans start to stand up and oppose Trump. He was the lone person who saved the, well, that's not fair, actually. Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins actually were there first. The women were there first. But he was the last person to come in to save the Affordable Care Act. He's also, I would say, he's probably the conscience of the Republican Party. Sometimes I have disagreed with him, but he's willing to stick up to Trump. And he's also kind of a maverick. So,
yeah, no, I think the thing with McCain is, it's on some level though that the hard thing is it's not surprising that McCain is where he is, or Murkowski or Lindsey Graham. I think the real change will occur is if you see someone who's more in the kind of, in leadership, McConnell, Thune, Cornyn. I mean, that's when I think it matters, and I don't think we've gotten quite to that point. I mean, no. Corker to a certain extent, but he's retiring, right? So I think it's almost like we had, on some level, once it gets beyond McCain, that's when it really, but he will continue to be kind of leading that charge.
And any one of those things, if any shoe drops, can really change the political landscape, obviously, and the world, if it's Kim Jong-il.
Yeah, a quick word on 2020. I mean, basically, I know that, and I want to actually jump forward to this one picture here. Jenny and I were looking at this last night, and there was an article from The Hill that the 43 people who could be the Democratic nominee. I mean, right now, I think on the Democratic side, one of the things you're seeing is it is a bit of a jump ball. There's not that one candidate or those 2 or 3 candidates who appear to be the obvious front runners. I also think people talk about 2020 with Trump, and there's an assumption, well, he'll definitely be primaried. He could be, but quite frankly, a primary opponent could be good for him. That gives him an opponent, it gives him someone to run against, and it gives him a chance to to engage in that combat that he's good at. And I don't know if John Kasich's necessarily the answer. So.
Yeah, just on that front, I mean, I think the candidates, I agree. I mean, there is nobody that is a front runner right now. Now, that being said, I've seen presidential cycles and presidential campaigns change on a moment's notice. I personally feel like, and I was just saying this to Brian earlier, this is probably half wishful thinking, but actually if I was like advising somebody, I think this could be a moment for sort of an Eisenhower-like candidate from both parties, someone who's outside the political system. A lot of the stuff that Trump was saying, Trump is the most flawed messenger in the entire world and is probably mentally ill. Sorry, I resolve myself to be more moderate on this, but my personal feelings are coming through. That being said, some of the stuff that some of the sort of thematic things about him are actually things that the country probably does need. If we had a real truth teller in there, if we had somebody that could really make a deal and bring parties together, if we had someone who was willing to throw away the old and bring in the new, I think if you go back to the very first slide we opened with, that distrust in government, people don't think government is working for them. I think a lot of people voted for Trump because they were like, all those guys, it's a big joke in Washington, they don't get anything done, and we might as well send in America's favorite clown to try to like stir things up and get things going. What we didn't realize is just how dangerous he was and just how far he would go and just how inconsistent intellectually he is. That's the thing that's probably, from a policy perspective, most damaging. So, there's a lot of sort of candidates that have been around that are elected officials, but I think both parties actually have to start thinking a little differently. Now, what we don't want to do is make the mistake, and sorry, Eric, I'm talking too much, but we don't want to make the mistake that I think happens in a lot of presidential campaigns that I've worked on, which is that you try to run the last race. Brian has a really good point where he says, yes, most candidates are a reaction to the last person, but you don't want to run the same kind of race. So that's something that we do have to be careful about. But I think it's not just a jump ball. I think, like I was saying, the ball is rolling around on the court, and I think that there's lots of people that could come and grab it and go with it, and I hope we sort of have a healthy conversation about where we're going. The slide before that, and we should go to you now, Eric, but is an interesting, can you go backwards? Look at that. You are so talented. It's kind of just to end and open up discussion. These slides sort of make all the points that we were making before, and I'm also kind of a map junkie. But this is the 2000 race, which I worked on, and Brian, you did too, I think. And this is the 2016 race. And in some ways, these maps sort of look the same, but in some ways, they look different. The colors have gotten darker. Like the blue states are bluer, the red states are redder. That's something that is evidence of sort of the increased polarization. The demographics of the country are sort of hinted in here, the changing demographics that are coming in the country. The fact that the Midwest will once again, as it has almost every cycle, matter again. And Florida. That's going to be a hotbed of action if you're from those states. You will probably become one of the most valuable voters in the world out there. And just like how close the races are, really, and sort of how divided the country is. Anything else on the map for you? No, I may want to leave it there to just start off the conversation.
Great. Well, thank you for that great overview. So one of the reasons I thought it would be terrific to have you here is you've both worked in politics, but you also have some outside perspective as well, which is great. People who really understand how the game is played, but you're not tied to any particular point of view. So I wanted to ask you a little bit to step back, each of you, and assess not just Trump, but where are the two parties? So if you look at each of them, for example, it's clear they have challenges, but they're not the same challenges. You look at the Democratic Party, and they have lost tremendous amount of power over the last decade, 1,000 seats or something, it's been said, at the federal, state, and local level. They just cannot win elections. They seem to have increasingly lost the ability to have touch with the ordinary American voter. They're having difficulty communicating, seem to be struggling with working class Americans. And there's also obviously now a fight about the direction of the party between the Sanders wing and other more establishment politicians. So on the Democratic side, I'd ask you both, where do you see the party going and what are their challenges? On the Republican side, they've had tremendous electoral success. And yet there's some important questions about them. Is the Republican Party now the Trump party? Is that the dominant wing of the Trump party if you see the leadership of the party, the McConnells and so on, essentially working with Trump? What happened to traditional conservatism? Is that still alive in the Republican Party? I also wanted to know about their ability to legislate. Here they are having a very difficult time. They can win elections, but can they actually pass important legislation? I just got back from the annual meetings of the Public Policy Association in Chicago, and there was a question there. We had a really nice panel. It was a bipartisan panel with experts from both sides, somebody from the Cato Institute on the right and people on the left as well. And a question that came up that wasn't resolved is, does the Republican Party have a wonk deficit? Is there a lack of expertise, people who are working with Republicans to actually be able to design bills in areas like healthcare, maybe taxes, that will actually strike those difficult balances and make legislation work? Or the Republicans become so ideological they're unwilling to make the hard choices that you have to make in order to actually pass bills. So if I could ask each of you to sort of talk about the two parties, not just in 2017 and 18, but where are they and what are their challenges and what are they going to have to focus on to be stronger?
Go ahead.
No, sure. Also, I mean, I think on the Republican side, look, this is in D.C. right now. I feel like a lot of individuals are in a straitjacket over this because the D.C. world is largely people who come from the world of traditional Republican politics, at least the world that I'm familiar with. So I think there's this sense right now of, so at one point the Republican Party may have stood for strong national defense, limited government, power of the individual, and now in the Trump era, it appears to be standing for different things. I know a lot of people don't necessarily feel comfortable with that, and I've heard a lot of people, Republicans who have worked for years or their lifetime in Republican politics saying, I don't know, is this the way the party's going? I think that, as long as Trump remains somewhat ascendant within the party, that's probably where it'll be. The big question will be probably after Trump, on some level, does the party continue to reside there or not? I do think, and Jenny was talking about this earlier, kind of, being critical of Republican leadership, and I think that's easy to do and understandable. I also think that on some level they're in a bit of a tough spot. Trump, we live in a totally reflexive age. He just became president 9 or 10 months ago. So on some level, I do think there's this notion that you have to give him a shot. But I do think the Republican Party's in a real tough situation right now, or tough spot, trying to figure out who they are exactly. And I don't think that's a question we know the answer to, and I think it may take a little while to flesh that out. On the Democratic side, obviously I'll leave this one more to Jenny. But it just seems right now that there's just this complete vacuum, right? And who steps into that vacuum? And I think that some people would seem conceptually good, but can they actually do it, right? And I think about a year from now, all this is going to start for 2020 in earnest. It's going to kick off early. I think it's going to be pretty intense. Some of the people think who could be good early probably won't be. If you go back to past political cycles, remember going back a few years ago, the hot people, Rand Paul was hot. The most interesting man in politics, Chris Christie, was hot. So sometimes the people who look the most intriguing when the presidential cycle really kicks in wind up flaming out.
Or getting beat up by their neighbor. No,
Yeah.
just kidding. It's a really tough and hard question, and it's one I've been thinking a lot about. I think for both parties, the nature of political parties has really changed historically. With the rise of the campaign finance decisions and the outside money, the roles of the parties are different than when Brian and I first started in politics. I don't love that, but I can see in some cases why voids were stepped into. I don't think we've had on the Democratic side candidates that have wanted to own the Democrats for a very long time, to own the party and Democratic values. Bill Clinton had some fabulous policy ideas, but a lot of how he ran them was in a triangulation against his own party. It was a marketing sort of trick that he pulled to try to, not every policy of his was great, but that led to the beginnings of Howard Dean or Bill Bradley, some of the people that were feeling like, what's so wrong with being for the working man? What's so wrong with being for diversity? And it wasn't that Clinton was doing that, but a lot of how he got covered and the narrative that he built was he was a different kind of Democrat. He wasn't like the same old Democrat. But to the Clintons' credit, they at least invested when they weren't bankrupting us to defend scandals. They did invest in the party, and they would go to party events, and they liked the DNC. And then we got Barack Obama, who, another amazing person. You hear him talk, and you just are in awe of him and his ideas, and very calm, no drama. But again, he and his folks were less interested in refashioning the Democratic Party and more about creating a Obama credo. And I remember getting in these massive arguments with Rahm Emanuel when we first were trying to fight on healthcare and stem cell and planning a healthcare conference. How many Republicans are you inviting, Jenny? Does Chuck Grassley have a speak? And sort of the Republicans made a very, it was very clear from day one with Mitch McConnell, who wanted to just oppose everything that Barack Obama did, that this sort of new utopia of Republicans and Democrats working together, like Obama so beautifully painted in his convention speech, wasn't actually the political reality. So, and that goes back to that partisanship. So we've had a couple of presidents who have had, for different reasons, have not totally helped the party get strong, and the party's been created as sort of a money pass-through. So the party is weak.
Yep.
And we didn't focus on winning elections in the right parts of the states. We've been sort of like rock stars following around the presidential candidate. I think for both parties, though, now, the turnout mechanism, I think that both parties are going to have to nominate candidates that bring people together. The Sanders thing is really interesting. I mean, I grew up in Vermont. Bernie Sanders actually rented the apartment in my parents' house. He taught me how to play stickball, and he was my basketball coach when I was in 5th grade. So I've known him for a very.
He can shoot?
Yes, he can shoot. There was great pictures of him in New Hampshire. Yeah. That being said, like, he's never been a Democrat, and that was always a very frustrating thing to a person in the DNC. And he and my mother grew up in Vermont politics together, and he kind of had his shtick, and I wasn't necessarily for him. I was kind of a little bit neutral in the primary, probably more for Clinton because she was a Democrat and she would help people. But he raised some really important issues that I think that resonated with me, with the economic focus, and he really. But I think the strength of the Democratic Party, I guess, to move forward, and how do we move forward from here, is our diversity. I think the Republicans have made a short-term tactical. Not Republicans. Trump has, and the Republicans, by not standing up as vigorously as I wish they would, have made a decision that if you look at some of the flyers that are in the Virginia governor's race right now, or in some of the races, the sort of rise of racism, the denigration of women, I mean, that is that's a voting force of people. To win elections, you have to convince people who either don't like you or haven't voted to vote for you. That's basically how. So Obama expanded the electorate. He brought in millennials. He increased turnout with people of color. Hillary thought that they would replicate that model. We still need to be able to talk to independents and working class people who used to be the bedrock of the Democratic Party. So I think that's a real challenge for us going forward. So it is really super depressing. I'm writing checks right now to candidates instead of, I'm not like I'm that rich, but my few dollars that I can do for political donations are going to candidates and people. But I think it's going to be the candidates and the people that are going to end up reorganizing the party in order to win on the Democratic side. On the Republican side, I think you guys have got to figure out what to do with the changing demographics of the country, because like the pure numbers, the charts are not going to hold it up.
And I think that's one of those things too, where it was something that after 2012 the party talked about that.
Yeah.
I worked for Ken Mellman at the RNC in 05 and 06. Ken was talking about it then. Bush was talking about it. I mean, this was something that the party, I think, has been acknowledging and talking about. And then all of a sudden Trump comes in and just detonates. I don't know what, but I mean, takes it a whole different direction.
Yeah, I mean, in the long term, the Republicans, clearly that's going to be a major challenge, but I think there have been Democrats that have thought demography is destiny, and we can inevitably win elections, and the country is changing demographically, but it's changing more slowly than some of the Democratic political strategists believed, and particularly midterm electorates may still look quite different for a number of years still.
Well, and I think that's a great point that you just made that goes back to, you win the presidency if you make people think you care about them, because most people do not walk around with an R or a D on them. You know what I mean? How are you going to solve the problem for me? And I think after this election cycle, and you're seeing it in the polling, Republicans and Democrats are like, the country is being ripped apart at the seams. The values that we stood for are not the same values that they used to. So there will be a uniter frame that comes back, and so you have to be able to be a president for all people. I think what's been happening is people have used the media, and both parties have been okay with just talking to the people that they need to talk to. And I think, sadly, crisis is going to force that kind of uniting. And I think practical needs to solve problems, like Russians meddling inside your election, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, or the rise of foreign powers, or the weakening of the U.S. in the world. Those are all issues that are big, heavy, real issues that both parties need to work on.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges, though, that's happened is you have the changing demographics, which everyone acknowledges. But over the last 30 years, you've also had other changes occurring in America as well, right? You've had certain parts of the country that have been left behind in terms of wages, lost jobs, opioid addiction, and I think that part of what happened with Trump is people got fed up with it. They felt like they obviously concerns weren't being addressed. The Clintons represented the status quo in a way that probably no other candidate could have represented except for maybe Jeb Bush. Yeah. And on the other side, you've got a guy who would just said, I'm just going to detonate, you know what I mean? And we don't know what's going to happen, but something different's going to happen. And so I think, you kind of have these competing factions where it's not all happening in isolation, which I think has been part of the reason why you've seen Republicans continuing to do well in a lot of these states.
Yep. I'd like to open it up. I'm sure many people have questions. I don't know if there are mics around or not. No? Okay, let's go here and then there. You're first.
So you talked a bit about, obviously, the changing demographics. How much of changing demographics will be offset by something like gerrymandering?
That's a super great point. I have been trying to support as much as I can. I haven't been in the mood to, sorry, Tom Perez, because you're a great guy, but I haven't been in the mood to support the DNC, but I've been trying to support Holder's efforts. I went to the DCCC in 2000, which is this Congressional Campaign Committee, because it was a redistricting year. And there were really interesting fights, and I thought I would learn a lot about the map to help me, because I just worked on the Gore campaign, to help me in 04 understand what was happening in the country by learning that. We completely dropped the ball on redistricting. We also dropped the ball on investing and winning state legislative races, which is hugely important, and then to a lesser extent governors. We actually have some opportunities with governors this year, and governors are really important. David Broder and Dan Baltz, Dan's still alive at the fabulous political, he's up at Harvard, sorry Dan, you have to come down here, and David Broder, who passed away, taught me, they were sort of people that taught me how to do communications on the Democratic side. And I learned very early on that they love governors because they've covered enough politics on both sides to see that some of the most interesting policy leaders, their governors are problem solvers. They have to come up with policies to solve problems, but they have an executive function so they can make decisions. They were always super interested in talking to people on both sides and would always go to the governor's races every year. We as a party, again, we got kind of rock star fixated, and because we weren't winning very many presidential elections. Like I have Obama, and I will never forget that. But like I have 15 years of working on elections back to Dukakis that were Democrats didn't win presidential elections. So I think that's a fantastic question. We have to start to undo that. I think some of the stuff that you're seeing is in Iowa, some of these places where commissions, nonpartisan commissions are coming in, you're actually getting some real diversity of voices, and some of the people that are saying some really interesting things are coming from districts that they're not all reflective of themselves, so they're forced to make some compromises. So I think the hope in Congress on both sides has been in states where the redistricting has been done in a more, I'm a little bit worried about what's going to happen to redistricting with the Supreme Court, to be perfectly honest. That is a whole nother factor. Brian and I we don't have a slide on that one, but that's a little bit troubling, and that's where a Trump legacy could be very detrimental. But that's a great question, and it's actually a big problem for the Democrats. You agree?
Question there?
Hi. So thank you both so much. And I want to start out by saying how much I admire your ability to remain moderate and sort of nonpartisan in your presentations, because it's something I have a hard time doing. I have two sort of, I promise I'll try to be super brief comments and then a real question. And they blend into each other. The first comes off of this idea of trying to talk to people that you don't agree with, which everybody's saying is so important for moving forward. My problem with that, and I wonder if you can help me get out of it, is that I don't think that there's parity between what people are being extremist or insular about. So it seems to me that Democrats can be unreasonable. People on the left can be super unreasonable. MSNBC is biased, and Rachel Maddow has gone off the rails in my view, even though I used to adore her. But the things that they're talking about and arguing for are not false. They're biased, but they're not lies. Whereas if I look at sort of the Murdoch, Fox News, Sinclair conglomerate, which will control 72% of news in people's homes in this country, they do propagate lies, demonstrable lies. And so the idea that there's extremism on both sides to me is you're being super fair, but I wonder if part of the problem isn't that there actually isn't parity between the two poles on this spectrum. And that to me speaks to a deeper problem, and that's the second comment, which is the Kardashian culture that we currently inhabit. And the idea that someone like Steve Bannon, who is a kind of a media guy, Hollywood guy, Seinfeld, royalties, is sort of the perfect person to represent the level of breathtaking incompetence when it comes to actual policy, but really great skill at media manipulation and popular culture media. So I obviously, I'm a Democrat. I read Breitbart all the time. I think it's important. And I actually mentally cannot stand it for more than 15 minutes at a time. It's incredibly toxic, right? But there's something about it, you know, the idea that we would get to a point as a culture where blow it all up seems like a viable option. To me, that is the deeper, more existential problem, right?
Right.
And you know, all of the policy stuff doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's a commodification to culture. There's a commodification to the advertising and to the media that is all part of a bigger existential crisis, I think, that we're having that has to do with commercialization in American politics. And the problem that we've discovered about the ads isn't just that people can buy them and we don't know who they are and Twitter is big, but that ads and confirmation bias go hand in hand. And so I'm sorry for all the long comments, but this is my actual question. Part of the reason people stay in their bubbles is because humans have a way of seeking out things that confirm what they already think. And I wonder then, what are the problems in what we really think? And I want to push back a little bit against this. The Democrats forgot about the working class, because everything I've read has shown that it was upper and middle class white people who put Trump in the White House, not the poor, not the working class, especially not just the white working class, in terms of who actually voted. So am I wrong about that? Because it seems the confirmation bias had a lot more to do with race, immigration, fear, terrorism, Islamophobia, than it does we forgot about coal.
No, I mean, you have a lot of really no. It's a lot of really important things that you. Let's start with the first thing that you just brought up. It's really important not to confuse, and it's hard, but it's really important not to confuse Republican policies and most elected Republicans with the propaganda machine that has built up with Fox News and Sinclair and the stuff that comes out of Trump's mouth. Because I don't think there's a secret cabal with Bannon and some of those people writing all that stuff, but it's not happening over in the Capitol. So and Congress, sadly, they don't seem to remember it, it's supposed to be the brakes on the crazy car that's out of control, and they're not there. But if we want to get the people that can stop the craziness right now from a policy perspective, immediate dangerous things like DACA, like, you know, taking away DACA, like some of the crazy stuff in the tax bill, those are going to have to be Republicans. So we're going to have to be able to have a conversation with Republicans as a country that says, and support them, and this happens to me a lot on Twitter, because Twitter's a weird media, but like when a Republican doesn't write a good thing and stands up to Trump, even though I hate where they are on abortion, and I really didn't like their last tax bill, and their health care bill was terrible, but they stood up, and when something that he said something or someone said something that was crazy, then we got to say, good job. I mean, you're going to have to be able to put it. So separating the elected officials from the machine. Now, elected officials take advantage of the media machine, and one of the ways that you have to do that is to create new things in popular culture, and it's really hard, that sort of go against those things. And if you watch popular culture, miniskirts are in one year and they're out the next year. I mean, I don't mean to be trivial, but like you can change opinion in popular culture and what's hot and what's not. I mean, that's part of the reason it's like eating popcorn or Chinese food. Like you eat it and you're sort of immediately satisfied for a second and then you're hungry the next second. People want something new and different. So that kind of world is always looking for something new. So you could maybe redefine opposition to some of this stuff as new. Now, what you hit on that makes me not be able to get up in the morning is I didn't think racism went away when Obama got elected. I was personally shocked as a political person that we were able to elect someone named Barack Hussein Obama it went from 0 to 60. You know, like we were fighting and fighting to get people of color to run, and all of a sudden he just like rewrote the rules. But it didn't change some of the stuff that was out there, and it's not. And some of the stuff that the Republican Party does is wrong, but sometimes some of the stuff that the Democratic Party does is wrong too. I am trying to find a solution. I'm going to be a proud Democrat, and I'm going to stick up to ideas that I don't like. But absolutism on both sides and the refusal to listen to each other, I guess there's no way to solve it. The last thing I'll say on the working class is demographically, Democrats have not won white men or white working class men for 30, 50 years. College-educated white women did elect Trump and were a margin, but you can sort of break that down. And there were racial messages that were put out there. There are always racial messages. I've been working in politics on both sides. I mean, not on both sides, but there's been racial messages that are put out. Sometimes Democrats put out messages that we're the only party that cares about African American. I mean, it's not always equivalent. And I don't think there's an equivalency. There's a reason why I'm a Democrat. But I think, I do think we need to make people who are, we can't pit one side against the other side. But we have to also stand up for our values. And I think that's the kind of weird balance that I think the party's going through. And I'm personally trying to go through about where is that balance. And I personally am not going to ever say we should talk less about race or we should not be defending the NFL football players. It's a free speech issue to me. But you have to figure out a way to say that someone that doesn't agree with you can still respect it. And I think it's in message consistency. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's such a tough issue, and I don't know how you pull back. And quite frankly, part of the challenge or with Trump is obviously he's done a lot to just continue to stoke those divisions, right, and just highlighting them and making it harder, I think, to come together. I do think, you know, hopefully at some point we can get back to a point where there is some level of unity. I mean, we were talking earlier before about the fact that you do see a trend in American elections where the person who's the president sometimes is a reaction to the person who went before, right? I mean, Jenny was mentioning that where, you know, Obama is intellectual and a little cool and distant, and then you've got this guy who's just like in your face, but Obama's a reaction against Bush, who was viewed as being unintellectual, who was a reaction against Clinton, who was seen as being dishonest, right? So maybe people will get sick and tired of whatever this program is that's on right now. I will say, though, you know, I hear your point on some of the stuff, the Democratic stuff, but at the same time in Virginia right now we're dealing with this election with Ed Gillespie, and you know, you have a whole conversation about Ed and what seems to be a developing fake Southern accent, even though he's from New Jersey. But I, you know, look, and I know Ed, and you know I'm from New Jersey, so I can see it, right, and hear it. But I mean, at the same time, the Democrats ran this ad where they had someone in a pickup truck with a Gillespie, you know, chasing little kid, and like that, you're like, don't do that. Like that's I mean, it doesn't make sense politically because it's just going to upset people. And to the other side, it's just going to say, well, now I know how you. And quite frankly, even among Democrats, you're sending a message. Well, if I drive a pickup truck, I know how you see me. You know, I'm a racist because I drive a pickup truck. So it's like, it's all part of this combustible mix right now that's just so unfortunately toxic. You know.
And the other thing is, I think I was at HHS when we passed the healthcare bill, and we had zero. You've got to actually be aggressive and have messengers and like go on the offense. Obama, I thank God every day that Obama, he was the only one inside his administration that actually wanted to go forward with health care other than Kathleen Sebelius and Tom Daschle. He was the only one. Everyone else was like, this is a loser, you're going to get killed. He knew it was going to be his legacy. But the problem was they didn't build a message operation in that White House, and they just didn't build it. I mean, I liked the people that were in there, but they didn't raise lots of money to run ads to support their nomination, whether or not you like people doing that. That is a problem and then I think the Republicans unleashed this fury that was the Tea Party. And I was with Kathleen Sebelius when we'd go do healthcare meetings with poor Arlen Specter, who was like totally sick, and we'd have to hustle them out with state troopers because they'd bust in a bunch of people. So when you unleash sort of anger, it's sometimes hard to control it. And I think that's what's happening to the Republicans right now. There was some tactical decisions to show opposition and win political short points. And I get it. I mean, if it's very important. But once you do that, once the beast is out and roaming, like, can you get the beast back on the leash? And I'm not sure that the beast is now running the Congress instead of the Congress running the beast. So,
great question there. Yep, with the microphone.
I've got one quick question for each panelist. For Brian, question, would Trump be a happier and stronger candidate in 2020 if the Democrats take the House next year? And for Jenny, how does the Democratic Party expand its appeal beyond what appears to be a collection of sort of relatively narrow urban-focused issues?
I think Trump would probably go through a period of time where he wouldn't be very happy because he'd probably be impeached. But I do think having someone for him to run against and having an other, as Jenny was saying before, and having the Democrats, I mean that would, I think, give him a foil that probably would, it might benefit him a little bit politically, and it might benefit him psychologically, because right now I think part of the challenge, and I think people saw this happening before the election, actually, excuse me, right after he became president, which is like, it's only a matter of time before he starts fighting with Republicans, right, which is already kind of happening. So as long as Republicans have everything, you know what I mean, there's only so much fighting against Democrats he can do, and the fights, I think, will remain will be insular. So I think on some level, even though that I honestly believe that if the Democrats took the House, they would impeach him. But
I actually kind of disagree. I think Democrats actually like right now for the next 4 years. I mean, I think it's got to be. I don't, but like I would like to have him gone because I'm just scared for the future of the world. But I think politically, some Democrats have made the calculation, and Pelosi said this the other day, that they would rather run. They're not going to focus on impeachment if they first get in. They want to try to break the narrative of partisan gridlock, which is going to the point that you were just making before. I was out in Iowa with an organization started by Will Marshall that's sort of from the DLC, which is the old sort of moderate policy wing of the Democrats. They were having a heartland discussion. So my old boss, Sebelius, was there. Tom Vilsack, who I think is a really thoughtful, amazing legislator. And they were talking about how do Democrats, we need to get back into the heartland of the country, that our issue mix is exactly where the people in these places are, but they're just not identifying us as messengers. So I think some of it will depend on messengers, but I also think we do best when we actually have policies that we can put forward, and I think we do, to your earlier point. Some of it is the luxury of being in the minority for so long, and then being in the majority in the governing part of in the congressional part. So we passed bills, and we have legacies that we can look to, like Medicare and Medicaid, and policies that helped a lot of people. But then we didn't have the presidency for a long time, so we could sort of develop. And then when we lost all of them, we still have good ideas, and I do think we have. And the Republicans really haven't invested as much in the ideas because you had a message frame that kept winning elections and working. And that doesn't mean that Republicans don't have good ideas. If you look at the Affordable Care Act, it's like 75% Republican ideas on health care reform. So there are ways to bring those policies together. I think it's you actually asked something. One of the dangers that Democrats have to be is not to be the party of the coasts. And one of the most scary things I ever heard in politics was when Karl Rove described the Democrats as limousine-driving, latte-drinking Democrats. And there is, unfortunately, a tendency of our party to sound elitist and to sound like we're talking down to people, and that we have all this money that we've made in the tech industry or somewhere else, and we've got all this great education, and that these people don't understand. And if you read, there's a lot of really interesting articles coming out right now about all these different groups that have gone out and done listening sessions to the voters that didn't hear their voices. And they sound like they're well-meaning and good sessions, but we got to look a little bit like we don't have the droit de seigneur, like walking in, here we are to listen to your problems, John Kerry, they did a great job of sort of painting there's a great Jon Stewart skit, again, I'm picking on poor John Kerry, who was a great Secretary of State and a good candidate, but he had a presentation that sort of was easily mockable about having Grey Poupon mustard on his Philly cheesesteak sandwich,
Well, and I remember from '04, one of the things with John Kerry was he went to a Wendy's, right, but then had shrimp vindaloo from some Indian restaurant delivered to the
bus or something,
the bus, and everyone went, this is
yeah, I mean,
fraudulent.
It seemed fraudulent. It wasn't fair. You should be able to eat whatever food you want to eat, but if you're trying to give, you don't connect with working class people by saying, I understand you, because you're not the same. But where you connect is like, what problems are you trying to solve? What are your ideas for making things better? And I think we stopped for a while talking about voters, other people. I think you win elections. Every candidate I've ever worked for is the candidate that makes the elections about the voters and not about themselves. And opposition research, which we both have used or created, all of that stuff, shame on us in some senses, but it's a way to go to that media that she was talking about earlier. So I think it's got to be around honest conversations about what's the problems that you're facing, some factual conversations, because many of these people are not getting facts about this is actually how Medicare works. I remember when the government shut down, I worked for Harry Reid, I got a phone call that said, tell Harry Reid to stop, and the government to keep their hands off my Social Security. I mean, that was a real phone call from somebody. And there was such a disconnect during the government's, So I think we got to make sure there's some facts, and then we got to have a dialogue about how to solve problems for them, and not be, I know best for you. And that's a really hard thing.
This is the kind of conversation that could go on much longer,
Sorry.
but unfortunately, we're going to have to end it there. Thank you both for a really stimulating discussion.
Thank you.